Hello and welcome to the ILC Daily Show. I'm Gabrai Berhana and we're coming live to you from Geneva and Beirut via our virtual Daily Show studio. We'd like to sincerely apologize for the short delay due to technical glitches. We'll be also having interpretation, but perhaps not the French one. We seriously apologize for that one. I'm pleased to be joined by Salwa Kanana. Salwa is our Senior Regional Communication Officer for the Arab States region, and she's based in Beirut. Hi, Salwa.
Hi, Gabrai. It's great to see you and to join you all for the ILC Daily Show. And as we've been doing since the beginning of the week, we're broadcasting live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Gabrai?
Thanks, Salwa. Yes, good to see you, so many of you joining us, and obviously we want to hear more from all of you watching. We'll be taking your question and putting them to our experts. The show today will look at two critical issues impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. The first is inequalities, and the second one is informal work. The human and economic impact of the crisis has hit the most vulnerable hardest and destroyed the livelihoods around the world. The world of work now is trying to build back better, and there's a strong determination to do that with greater equity for all. So please, you can post your question related to inequality on Twitter using the hashtag ILC Daily Show, or in the comment section under the player if you're watching on Facebook. Salwa?
Yes, please do post your questions. And in a short while, we'll be hearing from Philippe Marcadot, the chief of the ILO in-work branch and the lead author of the report on inequalities that was submitted to the conference. And a little bit later, we'll be joined as well by Anna Marie Kiaga, our Africa regional expert on informal work. So you can post your questions for both of them. Over to you, Gabrai.
Thanks, Salwa. And before we get that, the plenary session of the ILC continued today. The plenary is the public forum where governments, employer and worker representatives come together to discuss the world of work issues. Today we had statements from 40 delegates on the Director General's report to the conference. The conference committees also continued their work, including discussion on social protection and the application of ILO standards. Salwa?
Thanks, Gabrai. The ILC is convening the world of work at a decisive moment during the pandemic. Vaccine rollout in some countries is allowing for the lifting of restriction and a return to workplaces, but inequalities persist, and this next short video tells us more about the impact of COVID-19 on inequalities in the world of work.
Now, to explore more, to help us explore more the issues of global inequalities in more depth, we are pleased to be joined by Philippe Marcadon, Chief of ILO In-Work Branch. He'll be taking some questions from us, but also please do put your questions on Twitter using the hashtag ILC Daily Show or in the comment section under the player on Facebook. Welcome, Philippe. Now, the ILC will discuss the issue of inequalities during its second session in November. What can you tell us about the impact of COVID-19 on inequalities?
Okay, so first let me say that I'm pleased to be with you today. COVID-19 pandemic, which has triggered an unprecedented economic and social crisis, has highlighted the dramatic extent and consequences of pre-existing inequalities and appear to have led to further increases in level of inequality as the most disadvantaged population have been the hardest hit. Among the workers hardest hit, we find those who are at the low end of the income distribution and the most affected by inequality of opportunity, notably low-income workers, women who have been much more impacted than men, youth, migrant, people from ethnic minorities, and among all those groups, those who work in the informal economy who constitute the vast majority of workers in low and middle income countries. Just a number on that. According to our study, informal wage workers lost their job 4 times more than their formal counterparts. The COVID crisis also has revealed the large existing gaps in social security coverage and the inequality toward access to such an essential security. Unfortunately, many countries around the world have implemented unprecedented measures to counteract the economic and labor market effect of the pandemic, without which the impact on inequality would be worse. However, low-income countries characterized by a large informal economy have much more limited fiscal space to implement wide-ranging measures and acquire vaccines, leaving millions of workers and enterprises unprotected against the pandemic and its effects.
Before the pandemic, there was a consensus that inequalities were growing in many countries. So what have been the global trends on inequalities, and what are the main consequences of these trends?
10 years before the COVID pandemic, level of inequality had generally been at the increase or remain high or very high in many countries in the world. In spite of progress in some countries, Latin America remains with Africa the most unequal regions in the world. Income inequality has increased in a majority of countries. For example, if we take OECD countries, the average income of the top 10% reach almost 10 times those of the bottom 10% compared to a ratio of 7 to 1 in 1980. Global income inequality also remains an enormous challenge. The share of total income captured by the richest and the poorest in the world have diverged since 1980. Income inequality is only one form of inequality, but it is one of the easiest to measure and a prism which reveals and drives many other forms of inequality. Now, about the consequences, let's first speak about people. For hundreds of millions of people, inequality means that they cannot enter in the labor market, that their income is too low to meet their needs or those of their family. They have no access to healthcare and little saving for retirement to cover the cost of unforeseen life events. But the consequences of high inequalities goes beyond each individual or family. They have harmful effects on the pace and sustainability of economic growth, erode democracy, social cohesion, increase the risk of social unrest or political instability. High level of income inequality also slow down poverty reduction that require a combination of higher income growth and an equitable and wide share of the wealth generated.
Thank you, Philippe. You briefly touched upon this, but surely inequalities take different forms, and the report of the ILC actually addresses this. So what can be done to reduce inequalities in the world of work?
Well, first, we observe that many decision makers consider that the main tool for reducing inequality is an adequate system of redistribution through tax and transfer. And it is true that redistribution plays an essential role in reducing inequalities in many developed economies. But there are limits to what redistribution can achieve. For example, if the tax base is reduced because of a large informal economy, or if a country imposes a taxation so high that it leads to a mobility of capital to other countries. It is why we strongly argue in the report that reducing inequality should be addressed by combining and coordinating intervention in the world of work with redistributed policy and the provision of public services. With regard to the world of work, it is up to the constituents to determine during the ILC general discussion on inequalities what needs to be done in priority. So I can just say that in the report we highlight some drivers on more equal and fair labor markets, such as fostering the development of sustainable enterprise, productivity growth, formalization, and skills to generate enough quality employment. Labor income is the first source of income of most people in the world. Ensuring a just share of the fruit of progress to all through effective and inclusive institutions of work, mainstreaming gender equality and non-discrimination, providing support to vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, and strengthening redistribution through employment-based social security. At the same time, we argue in the report that there is no one-size-fits-all set of solutions, and policy responses should be country-specific, taking into account national choice and circumstances, which varies widely across countries of different regions or level of development.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Now we have some questions coming in from the audience. The first question is from Mamunul in Bangladesh. Mamunul asks, the impact of the pandemic varies across industries, sectors, and countries. How will the ILO deal with these inequalities on the ground?
So I think it's a good question, and it is true that the impact of COVID has been very differentiated among countries, among sectors. So what we try to do in the ILO currently is to try to have a focus of our activities on the sectors the most affected. For example, I was like yesterday discussing about intervention in the sector of tourism. In some countries, hostels that have been strongly affected. So this is what we can do with the means we have, to try to have a more focus on the most vulnerable, the sectors the most affected. This is how we can, I believe, contribute to reduce or at least limit growing inequalities.
Thank you, Philippe. Very shortly, we have perhaps one more question from Alice. She's based in Uganda. In short words, larger economies are recovering at a higher pace compared to others. What needs to be done to avoid more inequalities among countries? Very briefly, please.
This is a true question, because part of the capacity to compensate the effect of the crisis is linked to the fiscal capacity of countries. So obviously, low-income countries have a much lower fiscal capacity. And I really believe that they need to be helped by more developed economies to be able to overcome the consequence of the crisis, because they have less means, economic means, and institutional means to overcome the consequences.
A very insightful discussion we had. Now, before our next interview, we want to bring you another in a series of videos that we are showing every day. They feature the managers of some of our great projects on the ground in different regions of the world, and they bring a unique perspective of ILO's works in practice. Now, this is where we put decent work agenda into action and where we see the real results for the world of work. Today's video comes from Fabrice Leclerc. He's based in Haiti, and he's talking about a project called Profit. And basically, the project is about improving the living conditions of small-scale cocoa and breadfruit producers. Let's watch it.
Leclerc, and I'm the CTA in Haiti of a brand new project of value chain development called Profit, strengthening agro opportunities through training and investment. The project selected two very promising products growing abundantly in Haiti, the cocoa and the breadfruit. The Haitian cocoa is a unique variety called Criollo, solely growing in the Caribbean region and highly valued by European gourmet pastries and chocolate shops for its wonderful flavor and scent. But 5% only of the Haitian cocoa is currently fermented. The breadfruit value chain still needs to be created in actual fact. Considered as the fruit of the poor, it is largely not valued by the local population. Yet, it is gluten-free, rich in fibers, and in omega-3 and 6. The objective of the project, funded by the Norwegian government, is to improve the living conditions of 1,000 small producers, half of which are women, by adding value to the product through transformation with the help of local responsible partner companies. It can as well have an impact on the economic diversification of Haiti and curb the rural exodus to major Haitian cities.
Thank you very much, Fabrice, for your wonderful video. It's great to hear directly from colleagues in the field who have been working very hard to keep projects running during these very difficult times. And as Fabrice mentioned, this project Profit in Haiti is delivered in partnership with the Norwegian government, and we'll bring you another video tomorrow. Gebre?
Thank you, Salwa. Now, there are over 2 billion informal workers around the world today, and they have been hit hard by the COVID-19 crisis. Most often, they have no access to social protection measures, and they have no choice but to go to work. It's a matter of survival for most of them. To discuss the issue of informal work and more in depth, we are joined by Anna Maria Kiaga, the ILO's informal economy specialist. She's based in Harare in Zimbabwe. Anna Maria, welcome. Can you give us...
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you give us an overview of the situation of informal work worldwide and why informal workers have been hit so hard by the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, thank you. Thank you again, Gebre. And as you mentioned in your introduction, there are 2 billion informal economy workers currently. Now, until the discovery of the appropriate vaccines and the treatments, physical distancing was pretty much the only way to break the chain of transmission. So lockdowns were implemented all over the world. But for the informal economy workers, stopping work or working remotely from home is really not an option. Staying home meant for them losing jobs and losing their livelihoods. And in countries, for example, where data is available, we found out that informal wage workers were on average 4 times more likely to lose their jobs in the immediate impact of the crisis. So although there are very clear geographical differences, and also the fact that informal economy is very heterogeneous, but there are 2 specific reasons why the informal economy workers generally were hit hard by the crisis. The first one is the inequalities, as Philip has mentioned. What COVID has done is made the bad situation worse. I am not speaking only about inequality in income, but also inequality in access to opportunities, inequality in access to protection. For example, the crisis made it visible that the informal workers have no guaranteed access to healthcare services. And then secondly, it is the responses to the crisis. So governments adopted various measures to protect people's livelihoods and also to protect and facilitate business continuity and sustain their economies. However, these measures did not reach the people in the informal economy, except in very few cases. Many reasons are given for this: eligibility, qualification rules, obstacles of identifying the people in the informal economy. So, in general, this is what I would say why it is that the people in the informal economy were affected more than others. Over to you, Gubre.
Thank you very much, Anna Marie. Actually, if you don't mind, I have a question to ask you at this point. How important is strengthening social protection measures in improving the situation of the informal workers?
Okay, thank you, Salwa. Social protection. So basically, let me start this way. The lack of social protection is a significant source of vulnerability for the people in the informal economy, especially the workers. So the lack of access to healthcare and at least basic level of income security keeps many of them in a vicious cycle of vulnerability, poverty, and social exclusion. So this constitutes an enormous challenge, not only to them, to their individual welfare, but also to the country's economic and social development. So in other words, the lack of social protection is a challenge, not only in the daily struggles for them to make ends meet, but also in their aspiration to obtain decent work, to have rights at work, and also dignity. So for societies in which they live, the lack of social protection coverage undermines the inclusive growth, it undermines social justice, it undermines realization of human rights. So therefore, we promote expanding social protection because of its potential to reduce these vulnerabilities, to improve income security and healthcare access for people in the informal economy, and also enable them to plan ahead. And ultimately, all these will help them facilitate their transition to the formal economy. Thank you, Salwa.
Thank you, Anna Marie. Actually, it brings up a very interesting question, a follow-up on this one. So do you think that a transition to formal work has also downsides? What are the risks?
Okay, a very interesting question there, Kubre. The main risk, I think, is this age of instant gratification. You know, the idea that you do something today and get a result tomorrow. To understand the risks of formalization, one must re-examine rationale behind transition to formality. You see, formalization is not an end in itself. It's actually a means to an end. It is a means towards inclusive and sustainable economic growth, a means to employment and decent work for all. And moreover, transition to formality does not happen overnight. It is not a shift of people from informal employment to formal employment one day to the next. Instead, it is actually an incremental movement through a continuum, you'd say, of complex processes. Lately, a lot of people make references to formalization as if it is a panacea to poverty reduction. Now, the risk here is that those who manage to reduce maybe one or two of the decent work deficits will quickly get disillusioned and will return to the informality, because in reality, nobody, not nobody, maybe not all workers or not all enterprises will be able or will afford to go through the transition, at least in the short term. Instead, we need to focus more effort in ensuring more women, more men work in conditions of freedom, conditions of equity, in security, and also human dignity. Without structural transformation of the economies in which they operate, or without the existence of strong, effective institutions governing these economies generally, and particularly the labor markets, such a transition will take longer than desired. So the risk is really in managing expectations. Great.
Thank you very much, Anna Marie. Actually, we have a question coming in from the audience, which I'm going to put to you. This question is from Rajat from India. Rajat is asking, what are the most affected sectors where the impact on informal workers has been highest or higher?
Okay. So the question, the question is best answered on a geographical focus, because different sectors in different geographical areas have been affected. So for example, I can talk about Africa. And in Africa, the biggest, the sectors that were affected the most, we start with tourism. Because when the borders closed, there was no trade at all. No people coming in and nobody going out. Now, within that sector itself, it's not everyone. We are also looking at the self-employed people, people in creative arts who were actually depending on tourism to sell their wares. That became a bit of a problem because now they cannot sell anything. However, we have other bigger sectors where we see a lot of impact, but it was quickly responded to. For example, traders, for example, waste collectors. They could not move from one house on the other to collect waste anymore. But the countries responded faster to make sure, for example, food traders were allowed to go out and actually operate. And then the bigger sectors like mining, those were curbed for a while. So again, as I say, it depends on what geographical area you're looking at and where most informal workers are concentrated, what sectors most informal sector workers are concentrated in. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. You see, all your answers are triggering additional questions from our audience. So this one is from
Yes.
Bianca in Italy. She's asking what the ILO and its constituents are doing to protect informal workers. And if you can be very brief on this one, please. Thank you.
Okay, there are many ways that ILO is working with its constituents to protect the people in the informal workers. The main one I can tell you right now is to increase the recognition of the work of the people in the informal sector. You see, many countries for a long time have not been able to recognize this as real work and that it actually contributes to the GDP. So we are doing a number of campaigns. We are trying to make sure people understand the role that people in the informal economy are actually doing. And then after this recognition, then we actually plan a number of ways to actually intervene economically, socially, specific work that they do in general and in the general public perception of the informal economy. I think in short, I can say that's what we do the most at the moment.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. That was actually brilliant. Thank you. Thanks again. Now, that is just about the time that we have on today's daily show. And this was actually the last show of the first week of the ILC. We'll be back on Monday at 16:30 CST, and that's 14:30 GMT, with all the latest developments. Of course, Monday shows will look at skills and the changing labor market, as well as the impact of the crisis on the young people. A reminder for tomorrow. Tomorrow is the World Day Against Child Labor. And if you have missed the daily show yesterday on child labor issues and the ILC high-level segment of it, you can catch it up on www.ilo.org/ILC Live. I repeat, www.ilo.org/ILC Live. Salwa?
Thank you, Gabre. And we also have news stories related to child labor, including a blog from Peace Okebugwu, project manager of the Beula Future Leaders Foundation in Nigeria, and a podcast in Spanish with Andrea Valle, a political scientist from Peru. And of course, the ILO UNICEF report on child labor, all at www.ilo.org. You'll have different hosts on Monday. That's in just a couple days from now, the beginning of the second week of the ILC plenary sessions. They'll be joined by Srinivas Reddy, Chief of the ILO Skills Branch, as well as Susana Puerto Gonzalez, ILO Technical Specialist on Youth Employment. But for now, it's goodbye from me from Beirut, and it's been a real pleasure to present with you today, Gabre.
Same for me, Salwa, thank you. And we just again would like to apologize for the short delay due to technical difficulty that we had earlier. And also, please be assured that we will have full interpretation services on Monday. I wish all watching a great weekend and look forward, obviously, to seeing you next time. Don't forget to put your questions using the hashtag ILC Daily Show, and it's bye for us.